Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast, in which we fools attempt to bring ideas from philosophy to people who are interested in applying them in their own lives. I'm Boaz, and I've been a founder in renewable energy businesses, and now I consult on transformation with various organizations.
And I'm Brian. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to new folks. I'm an artist and a teacher and a creator and a backyard philosopher.
Thanks, Brian. In today's episode, I wanted to explore
Shall
something
we do my
that...
errata first?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you want to talk about cleaning up past mistakes. That's timely.
Yeah, I made another mistake, and it'll just pester me unless I mention it. And that was in one of our last episodes. I told a story about Diogenes, which is a story that I really love. And that was that when a famous character who I said was Marcus Aurelius, which was a stupid mistake because there's no way it could have been Marcus Aurelius, right? Because the dates are wrong. Marcus was Roman, Diogenes was Greek. It was Alexander the Great in the story, where Alexander the Great is very enamored of Diogenes because he's heard about him. He says, "What do you want? What can I do for you?" And Diogenes, eschewing wealth, said, "Just get out of my sunlight." That's the fun story. And I was telling that because I had mentioned meeting Mortimer Adler or seeing him lecture a few times when I was an undergraduate. And he was at that point touted as being the highest paid philosopher in the Western world. And so that was, the spectrum from Diogenes, who would eschew such a thing, to him who would trumpet the same. So anyway, I wanted to correct that. Now I can sleep. Now nobody's out there putting Marcus Aurelius in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we can move forward with a clear conscience. Okay.
Maybe we can avoid some critical comments on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. What kind of a fool would think that could have been Marcus Aurelius? True.
Who is this fool?
Exactly. I mean, that's why the fool is in there, right? So, anyway, the fool who persists in his ways will become wise. That's the principle.
Uh-huh. We're gonna have to reference that quote.
Yeah.
So there's something Ken Wilber talks about a lot. I'm not sure if he wrote about it in Sex Ecology and Spirituality, but it definitely shows up in Integral Theory and then in a bunch of the interviews that he does. And I thought it's like a theme that I come back to again and again, where he differentiates clean up, wake up, show up, and grow up. And I think show up and grow up are somewhat self-explanatory, but I think there's some interesting subtlety in cleaning up and waking up. So he distinguishes cleaning up as kind of dredging up shadow material and integrating it, and waking up as elevating consciousness. And he talks about those being kind of interlinked and separate processes. And I think it's, he gives the example of Buddhist monks, 500 years ago, still having slaves as evidence of having woken up but not cleaned up. And I'm not sure about that example. I think that's an interesting example. And then in modern times, we talk about spiritual bypass a lot, where we see people who meditate like crazy, who get as high as people can get, it seems, but they still beat their dog or, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I'm really curious to hear your take on those as separate processes and also how they inform one another.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It almost sounds like Wilbur was updating and reprising the motto from the generation before, which was turn on, tune in, drop out. And this is the same sort of a list of uh, exhortations, one might say. And yeah, I mean, the first two that you mentioned, grow up and show up, are kind of part of that. The when we spoke about the energy of the universe wanting to kind of expand you into your best self, that's kind of the shiny part of that formula. Not to say that there isn't some work in growing up and showing up, absolutely. Uh, but the cleaning up and the waking up are, the first thing I think of in cleaning up is I think of the process in the 12-step program where it's like you realize that there are repercussions to our actions, and that's like a big step of it's part of showing up and growing up is taking responsibility. And so realizing that you failed maybe in the past to do that, one of my old teachers, he described the spirit of his art as seeing what was wrong and moving immediately to fixing it. And that's that idea of cleaning up was, if you've woken up and you see, then it's really incumbent upon you to fix it, right? If you stick Marcus in where Alex should be, darn it, you should fix it as soon as you can, right? And that should be your instinct because something about the things that need to be cleaning up now offends you. It's the way it's, you know, and maybe that was a little exemplification of that, right? That I don't know if you could sense my disgust at having said Marcus Aurelius instead of Diogenes, but that's the spirit, right? To say, man, when I screwed up, I have to go back and I have to fix that because I feel like I could have done better, and so I'm gonna do better. And so when there's results of me not doing better, I'm gonna go fix it, right? And that is an instinct. We talked about that in craftsmanship, saying that, when something's wrong and you've broken the rule of the first thing, the next thing, and the next thing, uh, you have to go back and you have to clean it up. And I think that it's possible for humans to get so far down to leave such a trail of wreckage that the idea that they can clean it up uh, is seems like emptying the ocean with a teacup. That's not an argument for not undertaking that commandment, right, of cleaning up.
I think there's an implication here too of so the way you're describing it is that as we become more conscious, we become more aware of what needs to be cleaned up. But I'm not sure that's the case. I don't know. I think in the cleaning up category, there's like a unique variety of blind spots that call it Freudian defense mechanisms or ways in which we tell ourselves stories about reality and about who we are that prevent us from seeing clearly. And I think it's kind of mysterious how and when shadow material arises to be integrated
Yep.
and then having like a real process for integrating it is yet another thing. So like becoming aware that I have a tendency to think that I'm not good enough and that influences my behavior in any number of ways it's kind of feels like a lifelong process to identify the ways in which that runs me around and take ownership of it.
And so and what you're really saying is that waking up is not immediate. It's a
Yeah.
process.
Well,
Although there
cleaning up.
are satoris, there are ahas where Monday you're different.
Yeah.
But in general, I think that the same is probably the case for showing up and for growing up, you know? I think of the famous musician, I don't wanna say Marcus Aurelius, famous musician who was in his 90s, and someone asked him, they said, "You practice every day still." And, you're 90, like, you've done everything, you're renowned, you're still practicing every day, and his response was, I think I'm still making progress," right?
Yeah.
And and he's still gonna make progress even though he knows that tomorrow he might keel right over, you know? So
What
there's a
seems
timeless
mysterious.
value there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, um there's a few connections to that, right? One is just the value of discipline and understanding that self-improvement always has more room. But what's really mysterious to me about this is how many of us turn to something like meditation or even ayahuasca ceremonies or something where we can have peak experiences where we can experience our consciousness merging with universal consciousness and all that great stuff. And how the mysterious part to me is that despite those insights, we still have blind spots in our day-to-day life. And
Sure.
that's what I'm wanting to drill into a little more.
Well, there's a thing there. Some of these blind spots are sewn into the fabric of our perceptions in ways that we spoke about in the conversations about the semantic world and how we grew into them. Uh, for example, I talked about me coming to understand the implications of being adopted. And as my awareness started to be able to palm that basketball, uh, I became aware of the isness rather than the thingness of the issue. In other
Share
words,
more about that.
there's
Yeah.
if we conceive it as a thing, it's like something we can grab and we can manipulate and it's a problem that we can solve. We can draw a line around it. We'd say it's this and not this, and right? But this is a lot subtler. This is more woven in the mechanism of relationship with reality, in the way that our perception is sort of qualified by that in ways that we can't see. And when we look in the history, for example, of yogis, uh, there's a famous picture of Ramana Maharishi, who I've mentioned before, Advaita Vedanta, and in this picture, he's got one hand up and one hand to the side, and his fingers are in a mudra, which is a hand posture. And what's going on there, it looks like he's standing there, but what's really going on is this is in one of these moments where it's like he stuck his finger in a socket, an electricity socket, and there is high voltage running through his body. He's having a non-ordinary consciousness type of experience, but then it shuts off and he comes back and he's a normal person again. And like my Zen master said, the world of God is wonderful, but in the world of God, there's no restaurants and no bathrooms. But they do say, this is again one of these things they say that comes along very rarely, every 500 years or so, that a yogi will come along who actually can maintain those circuits open and that electricity connected 24/7. He doesn't just go and visit, he lives there. And that's what they said was the case of Neem Karoli Baba. And ironically, he had no worldly possessions apart from a blanket. Uh, and also, and it's hard to say because these are all secondhand stories, but if you read the book The Miracle of Love, which is stories about Neem Karoli Baba, this guy had what are known in the yogic traditions as siddhis. He could do things normal people can't do, uh, because of this unusual relationship, both physiological and psychological. This is the yogi that Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, the Harvard professor in his incarnation as Ram Dass, went to India and gave a bunch of very good LSD to him, watched him down the hatch, and then watched him as he, went through the experience. And he had the serious medicine. So he knew, I mean, this guy wasn't just a lot of stories because he definitely manifested stuff on a level of consciousness that was not normal. A fun thing is to read the beginning of Be Here Now also, where you take someone from the Western academic tradition rooted in that
That's
mind.
Tolle? Eckhart Tolle?
No, no, this is Ram Dass
Oh, okay.
in Be Here Now. Yeah. And And he's lifted from that academic mindset into a wonderful story, wonderful story. He talks about being a Harvard professor and masquerading in his normal life as, in quotes, air quotes, someone who knew. But he said within himself, he knew he didn't know. Take caution, take a word of warning, professors. And he said that at least it might be a good idea if on his summer vacation he went and tried to find someone who really knew. And so him and other professors, I think Leary was maybe part of this group and maybe Metzger and a couple others. Uh, but they traveled to India, they traveled to Japan, they talked to Zen masters, they talked to yogis. I actually had a conversation with Ram, uh, which was a wonderful opportunity. We spoke for about an hour at a friend's wedding.
Wow.
Uh, I did a wedding ceremony and I blessed the couple with a ayahuasca song. And Ram came up to me and he said, "I know about ayahuasca." and and we had a fascinating hour-long conversation. And I said to him, "Why didn't you guys go to talk to the ayahuasqueros about you were trying to build maps?" They went to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and they were trying to find, are there any maps of this new of the planes of non-ordinary consciousness? And uh that's where they got the Tibetan Book of the Dead, was one of those maps. This is where the Grateful Dead got the name The Grateful Dead, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So there's a theme running through some of these cultural
And what
things.
was his answer to why didn't he, go visit ayahuasqueros?
He said they tried. He said
Uh-huh.
that they would never come out of the woodwork. They always kinda got fingered for the white guys, and, which was amazing because, when I was down in South America, it was exactly the opposite. It was
Yeah.
welcoming like family and living in their homes and really taking care of me, and it was a generational thing, for example, my son Blaze, I did pursued kung fu, from the age of 12, and for me, going to China was like, what the idea was like going to Mars. You know? And my son's generation, like, "Oh, yeah, you go to China." And both of my sons have been to China, and they've, studied kung fu there. Blaze has a TED Talk that he gave about in China, about studying there. But he had the benefit of that second generation. And so Ram was really the first generation wave, Ram and Leary and those guys, into these traditions for the straight Western world. And there's some
So
other interesting characters, Andrija Puharich, and, so there are some ethnobotanists, and, these were all the people that sort of were the pioneers leading to McKenna and our further generation.
what happened when, Neem Karoli Baba took a bunch of acid?
Well, what he did was he told Ram Dass that this was a very powerful medicine, and that if you took this medicine, you needed to surrender to God completely, and that most yogis would not take this medicine. That most yogis were not at the level of surrendering to God completely.
Mhm, mhm.
But you know, for Neem Karoli, this was he was in this state of a very advanced yogi, so he could do some stuff that we don't understand, apparently.
I remember, I think it might have been in the first or second ceremony I did with you, because you were the first maestro I worked with doing ayahuasca ceremonies. And I don't remember if it was in the first or second one, but when I went to sit in front of you and get some individual work done, you said it's not by thinking. And back to your comments about kind of recognizing how being adopted has impacted your semantic reality, um, and experiences that I've had where I tend to be analytical. I grew up in a super academically oriented family, and um, good at debating and good at I want to know where this thought form came from and how it formed and how it affects me and all this stuff. And I get really analytical about it.
Mhm.
And a lot of my work has been kind of trying to relax instead. And I'm thinking about the component of the 12-step program. I think also is where this comes from, of the awareness, acceptance, action loop, where you don't need to analyze, right? You become aware of a pattern, and there's an actual acceptance of the pattern, which might be called joining with God at some level, or surrendering to God at some level,
Mhm.
and then action being deciding what you're going to do, as opposed to analyzing.
Right.
So yeah, um, the the cleaning up part, I mean, working with a therapist that can help illuminate what might need to be cleaned up is helpful, but there also seems to be this powerful karmatic or developmental component, or both, where stuff surfaces when it's ready to, and we become aware of it when when we're lucky enough to become aware of it, it seems.
No, I think there's an organic process at work. We spoke about this before. You wanna make sure you're a good distance away from the bear before you turn around to look at him. That's kind of a luxury that when you're still huffing and puffing to get away from the bear, you don't have that luxury maybe. And I think that what that the idea of when I say it's not by thinking, this is connected with, if you remember, when we spoke about the semantic world, that one of the functions of the semantic world is to ward off the uncertainty of life, to find some security, and to use that as an intermediary place to derive that security. And that's why we sort of create a self to exist in that world, right? And that's where this fragmentation starts to come from. So we won't necessarily find our way back to those parts that were fragmented off by thinking, because thinking was kind of a defense mechanism. This starts to sniff around what Wilhelm Reich was talking about when his term was Lebensangst. Lebens is living, and Angst, we have the same word in English, the anxiety around life, and I think that does come from, like there is a new theory that I saw. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a fascinating thought, talking about the relationship between Neanderthals and humans, and saying that Neanderthals had night vision, I guess, in ways that we didn't. I don't know that
Is this
that's true or
pile?
not. Pardon?
Is this pile?
Uh, y I don't think so. Or you mean pie?
Yeah, Pi, yeah,
Roy
the
Pye?
anthropologist.
No, this is a younger guy who's still around. And the theory is that, we got hunted at night and that's where the instinctive, intuitive fear of the dark comes from. I think there's a lot more going on with that, but maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's one of the threads of the tangle. Uh, because, yeah, I mean, it doesn't take Neanderthals. There was plenty of stuff out there to hunt us at night. Uh, and, the instinctive, like when you're in the Amazon jungle and, you'll hear sounds out in the jungle, like one of them is the shushupe, the bushmaster, right? He makes this and you don't know where, you just know he's out there, right? like the in many ways the jungle is like the unconscious mind.
Mhm.
It's thick, but it's alive. It's dense. We can't see into it, but we know that there's things that are alive and moving in there. And we know that somehow we're related to these things. We came out of that jungle. So yeah, there's a fascinating thing there. And in nighttime kind of represents that, doesn't it? You might be in a more domesticated environment, but at nighttime, that's the closest you'll get to that feeling of who knows what's out there.
Makes me think of nighttime as yin, and the hidden,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
um, again, but by uh, I guess the to follow the metaphor, the analogy, like running out into the jungle and trying to shine a light around and hack away, might not illuminate what's really there. Um,
right. That's what somebody who is disconnected from it would do. That's what the separated, fragmented self would do. But the one that's connected to it would go, right? Like the animals that live there do. Uh, you would call to those things, right? To discover that connectedness rather than to alter the environment for your own clarity. That's the idea because that brain wants to colonize that other territory, right? If only we could understand the unconscious mind. Well, if you could understand, it wouldn't be the unconscious mind. Come on. You got to play tennis with a net here. Right? So the relationship that we have with ourselves has to be deeper than the relationship that we have with our will or our daytime self, right? And I think that this is the thing that I harp if I can figure out how to get it on a t-shirt, I will. And that is that you are more than the you that thinks it's you. Okay? That's one side of it. And the other side, also revealed by ceremonies, is that not all the things that take a voice in your head and predicate thoughts and masquerade as you are necessarily you. Right? So don't take any wooden nickels. Uh there was one ceremony that I can remember where, because I think we talked about, in some past episodes about some of the obvious kind of stuff that's in your face going boo, and kind of trying to get you off your game. But in one ceremony in particular, I noticed that there wasn't any big scary thing on the screen. But I went through a reverie, sort of reviewing my life, but there was a voice that was narrating it. And it was narrating it with all the most negative interpretations, the most cynical, the most complaining, whiny, kind of like the most negative interpretation of everything. And I almost went for it for a while. And then I had this little aha. I was like, wait a minute. That's not me. I know my life. I know my relationship with my life. That's not me. And then over there to the side, it's that thing casting its influence or its effect over my perceptions. But it's a voice. I mean, it was a narrator. It
Mhm.
was this happened because of this, and this is why, right? Like it had an agenda with its narration. And I realized, oh my God, some people live with this. Some people, they don't realize this is not them. So if you're listening to me, that's not you. Okay. You need to develop the skill to get that spatula between the frying pan, which is you, and this thing that's stuck on you, and flip that thing off, right? Because and this is one of the important lessons of ceremonies that you don't need ceremonies to do. That Jorge used to say all the time. That ceremonies are an opportunity for us to look at our lives, to see what's good, and to see what's not good, and to choose what is good. And it's again, this is like ridiculously simple. It seems like, well, who isn't doing that all the time? Well, you would be surprised. Sometimes we do need to step back and we do need to realize that we get so tangled up in things that we can't see the forest for the trees. And so, an ability or a mechanism or a place or a ceremony or something that can help you step back. Sometimes that's what a therapist does, right? And look at things with a completer vision, a whole vision, mind like the moon, and see things for their objectivity as far as what's good and what's not good, and then to choose what is good can be revolutionary, revolutionary. Uh, but so yeah, this is all part of cleaning up and waking up and growing up and showing up. And this is all sort of kind of being who you really are. We've talked about it that way. Alan Watts wrote a great book called "On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Really Are." Or on the taboo of knowing who you really are, maybe something like that. We'll get it in the show notes. And and it's all about that. It's actually called The Book or On the Taboo of Knowing Who You Really Are. So and he describes it as saying this is a book that I wish I had been given at an early age, to understand what's going to happen, what is society's effects going to be. This is a book that I would give my son, he said, to try to understand. And hopefully, if we've integrated that, we live the example of transcending that taboo, and we take on the courage to show up as who we really are. Uh, but yeah, it's a process, it's a hurdle. And, there's some argument that it is like a cosmic egg. The beautiful thing about an egg is that it protects the chicken, right? Or it's not a chicken yet, the chick protects the almost chicken until a certain point. And at that point, the chicken is empowered to break the egg, to crack that cosmic egg, to expand into its true chickenhood. Okay. And because that's what the universe intended for it to do, was to get out there and chicken. And so there are a number of mechanisms that work that way that we have to break out of, and they serve a purpose until we're empowered enough to break out of them. Then we are transformed, like in the Prolegomena to Zarathustra. We are transformed from that camel into the lion. That now, what was the purpose of the dragon with "Thou shalt" written on every scale? That was the chicken. That was the egg shell. Because if you weren't a lion, you don't have what it takes to start making the decisions of what you shall and what you shall not, right? You should take that under better counsel, right? And but when you become the lion, that comes on you now. Then you can show up because you've grown up. Now you're a baby, right? In the prolegomena, yeah. To keep the metaphor.
I wanna go back to something you said about how we create the self in order to protect ourselves. We seek security. And I guess I have a couple of questions around that. One is it is it possible or how much is it possible to live without that type of security? And what is the experience? Um, how does the experience of being alive change when we let go of the security of the self? And then the other question is, I think of original sin as formation of the self. Like self-awareness creates this split
Yeah,
inside ourselves. And when we become fragmented or disconnected from self, we become disconnected from others, from God, from the universe, etc. And I'm
yeah.
wondering if that's how you see original sin also.
Well, there's a number of there's a number of old Gnostic texts. This is a fun fact, okay? Look at the original texts, and the serpent is not described as Satan. The serpent is a serpent. And later on in Christian theology, it starts to take on the associations with Satan. But that's an interesting ambiguity that it's not there from the beginning. And in fact, there are some Gnostic texts that associate the serpent with Jesus Christ, I believe. Because, and I think this is one of the treatises in the Nag Hammadi library, where there is this idea that, well, now you have. See, this is one of the other tricks about Genesis, right? Is this pesky serpent said God lied to you. He said that you would die, but look, she ate of it. She's not dead. He eats of it. He's not dead. But we do overhear the gods say, "Oh no, they've eaten of the tree of knowledge, and now they will be like us." And then they're going to want to eat of the tree of immortality next. So, so whose side exactly is God on in that rendition? There is some certain ambiguity there, right? That's not lost on some of the early Gnostics. I mean, I'm just reporting it. You make of it what you will. Uh, but this idea, then remember, a serpent has been associated in the East for a long time with Kundalini energy. And so we refer to the waking up of Kundalini. Uh, and I would argue that to the minor and humblest degrees that I can speak on the topic, that when Kundalini awakens, you know good for good. You have a firsthand experience of the nature of things. And I could see that as being related to the knowledge of good and evil. So, was this just another eggshell? That's you're meant to be contained by until you have the capacity to break out of it.
Self-awareness being the eggshell.
Yeah, yeah. And that consciousness becoming conscious of consciousness. That's really what's kind of implied there, because knowledge of good and evil, there's a point in the Tao Te Ching where Lao Tzu quotes the ancients. Okay, this is Lao Tzu quoting the ancients. And he says, "What you value and what you fear is within yourself." So, good and evil don't exist in a state of nature, right? Uh, Things just are what they are. Good and evil comes with self consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's also when we start to define good for me, bad for me, you know? Uh, your dog loves to get breakfast, but I'm not sure that he thinks of it as good for me. Like, that's an extra removed step of being aware of self. I think he just merges with breakfast, you know? I think that when the coyote catches the rabbit, all he thinks of is, "Oh, I love these." Right? He wants to merge with them, and that's what he does in the best way that he can because 'cause they're tasty, right? So, uh, yeah, so there is this unfolding of that, uh, plan.
Reminds me of the Solzhenitsyn quote, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the beast and the gods.
yeah.
Yeah. But that this idea that as there's some evolution happens, then good becomes more real for us. And it's interesting because if we look at history, right? Here we are sitting pretty in whatever historical seat we are, and we look back at history and we say, those bastards, look at what assholes they were. Look at how poorly they behaved, right? So what we're really saying is, I mean, couldn't we just as easily say, "Thank God there's some progress here?" Because if we look back at them and they were only better than us, then we're on a bad ride, right? So so we should hope in some ways that we can surpass the ancients, as we hope for our children to surpass us, and we hope that we are doing better than our antepasados. You know? And the ways that we aren't, we should be taking note.
Yeah,
Underline,
taking
underline,
stock.
underline.
Yeah.
Taking stock.
Let's go back to what it means to shed layers of security. And I'm guessing without living in that higher voltage state that you referenced earlier and merge and surrendering completely to God, that it's only in that condition that we relinquish security altogether. But I think that there are layers of security that we
I think
shed.
there are. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I always love to reference, and this is something that if you don't know about this and you haven't got a hold of these, by all means do. These are the poems from Han Shan, the poems from Cold Mountain. Uh, Han Shan was a Buddhist Taoist hermit who lived like 80 li west of the capital, something like that, wherever that was, in a place called Cold Mountain. We do know where that is. We do know where Cold Mountain is. You can go visit Cold Mountain. And uh, the fun thing about him is he had a friend at the Buddhist monastery, and he'd show up at the back door and he'd get stuff from the kitchen, I guess, once in a while. And he would write poems, and he would paint these poems, write them on cliff sides. And, he got some kind of a reputation for that, such that the emperor thought this guy would be perfect to have as a court poet. Because, of course, every hermit wants to be, you know, lauded and celebrated in the capital. That's why they become hermits, right? So so he sends the army out, "Go get this guy, bring him to me, I wanna check him out." Right? So they go out there and they see him. They never catch him. Once in a while, they'll see him, but he knows the mountain way better than they do, and so they come back and they say, "We just never could catch the dude." So, uh, so as second best, he sent them out to collect these poems, and there's about 300 of them. And they tell you about his state of mind because an interesting thing happens when he writes. He's called Hanshan, which is Cold Mountain. The place where he lives is called Cold Mountain. And he uses the term cold mountain also to refer to his headspace when he's in cold mountain. So when he says to you, try to make it to cold mountain, he's telling you, try to make it to the place where my head is at. But he warns you. He says, the path is not clear, and there's places where the snow doesn't melt even in the summertime, and it's rocky and covered with vines. And if your heart is not like mine, you won't get here. And but he's got some great, I mean, just wonderful stuff. And I definitely kudos to the emperor for trying to catch some of that for posterity.
Can
Uh,
you make the connection back to security?
well, sure, because for Hanshan to be in that headspace, he has no cultural game investments. Same with Neem Karoli, right? He's got a blanket. That's it. He's not here for stuff. He's got no use for fame or influence. In fact, he got famous so that when he show up at a place, people would want him to do miracles for him. The crowds would start to gather, and he would often have to get up in the middle of the night and run away because it wasn't a positive for him. He was not after any game payouts. So what that means is that he's got no fear of being canceled, right? He has self-canceled. This is kind of what the idea when a monk goes into the Taoist monastery, he gives up his worldly name and he takes on a new name because he's a new person. He's not the game out in the game playing universe anymore. That was the old him. Now he's a new him. Right. He's going to shave his head off to show you he's not in the game. Or some nowadays, maybe you can do the opposite. But what does it say? It says you're not in the game because you're playing some other game, right? And so that means that you have separated from the leverage that people's opinions of you have. You're hopefully have separated from, for me, I mentioned before that my setup sort of made me an approval dupe. And so being when I had that realization, that made me rather recalcitrant to wanna satisfy everybody with everything they wanted and all the demands they had and all their standards and and it's all for them to feel good, right? And I realized, if I can get clear of all that, I'm gonna have an easier time cleaning up, waking up, showing up, and, growing up. Right? So and I think that's probably why people have gone into monasteries and gone into the desert, because it's about the least culturally reinforced environment. Uh, at least it feels that way, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
what, Jesus went into the desert for 40 days? Uh The tribes of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years. The desert is not just kitty litter, contrary to what Earl Butz tried to say some years ago. It's not just symbolic either. I think it's energetic, right? I think there are components in the ways that we connect with environment that different environments do us differently. And going into the desert is a thing for a reason, so that I can't squeeze all the juice out of that orange. There's a lot in there.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Coelho and the Alchemist also. There's like the desert is a really important transition, right?
Oh, yeah, interesting connection.
Yeah. Um, so and security is tricky. Like I feel committed to waking up and cleaning up. And when I also think about my responsibility to my family and like that requiring me to earn money, that's also an attachment to security, or I guess all attachment is about security, right? So there's like how we define ourselves and how we set up our life structure, where we're trying to balance like what is the security I'm not willing to let go of yet, and the corollary is how much space do I have for cleaning up and waking up maybe. But part
Yeah,
of growing up is creating security for others, right? To bring back that Jordan Peterson quote about if you want to find meaning, carry the heaviest burden you can bring yourself to
yeah.
carry, right? And
There is such a thing known as the path of the householder. That's a thing. And there's also a tradition of hitting a certain age where you've fulfilled your obligations, where your children are grown, where
Mhm,
you've done your furthering of others, and now you can go find God. I
mhm,
mean, that's a tradition I know within certain groups in India.
mhm,
And there's an appropriateness to that also.
mhm,
When you hit a certain age, the whirring of the cicadas is not as loud as it was when you were young.
mm,
It's like, and that's where I feel like now you asked me a few episodes ago, what chapter am I on? And part of the chapter that I'm on is that gear shifting that enables you to reshift your focus
mhm,
and that you can focus. That's why I said, it struck me as a realization that I could have a nice house, right? And because I've been rebuilding my house. Now, when I say nice house, it should be qualified that he laughs. It's still made out of mud. I still have a frost free in the kitchen rather than a regular running water. It's still,
That was a funny
rarely.
design choice you made there.
Yeah, yeah. But it's definitely, finished in a way that's pleasant to me, more pleasant to me now, and the wind doesn't blow through quite the way it used to, and but it was almost a signal of that chapter of the householder, shifting to where now my kids can take care of themselves, and the the that direct responsibility now is lessened so that I can think about what did I have to put on hold? What were the sacrifices that I made that maybe prevented me from parts of me from showing up? That now, and there's a naturalness to this. The better I show up, the better it is for them also, as long as I'm showing up in chapter appropriate roles, and uh, I feel like we rush through things like rushing through a museum, you know, and to get it, you got to camp out there practically,
We
right?
rush through things in life or in this podcast?
In life,
Uh-huh.
yeah, and probably in this podcast too, but such is life. But we rush through things because we can't. This is one of the things I said when I was talking about painting and how it altered my perceptions. Is it changed my habits around seeing, so that while my eyesight is not as good as when I was younger, I see better. So then I might not hear quite as well, but I hear better. So there's something that's going on with that. And in this chapter, maybe part of it is seeing, coming to understand what you've really been seeing all these years, coming to a deeper, because of your perspective now in a place where you're not as game entangled, or you have the opportunity to not be as game entangled
Yeah.
if you are so directed.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of one foot in the boat and one foot on the shore there, and asking myself, how how can I be of service? How do I make that a more central part of my life? And even as I'm saying that, I can feel like the analytical part of me trying to elbow its way in to answer that question instead of surrendering to being of service. Like, I can feel
Uh-huh,
that tension.
uh-huh, yeah. Well, and it took me a while. Guess maybe that's even overstating it. I'm starting to get the degree to which the flowers will open up on their own.
Mm,
The degree to which my instinct is to want to pull the flower bud open because I can visualize it so crisply that I want to, you know, get it out there and see it. And this is part of the wisdom, the wisdom of doing the first thing in the first place, the second thing in the second place. The third thing, it just has to have that where you're allowing, and we have this thing in internal arts where we say we want the inside and the outside to be moving at the same speed. And so, and people are like, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, have you ever been in a traffic jam and internal you is rushing on your way to work while physical you is stuck there in the seat? How did you like that? That was when it was way turned up, right? The differences in the speeds. Okay, now, have you ever been on a perfectly clear highway, but you're driving to a root canal? Okay. Now you got exactly the inversion of that. Your body's moving at a perfect rate, and you're internally, you wish you were back home in bed. So those are situations where you try to put the spotlight on the circumstance, but there's way subtler degrees in where these things can be mismatched. And when they're mismatched, there's going to be a little friction. And that friction is going to take its cost, like it does in mechanical things, right? So there is a great longevity in getting the inside and the outside to move at the same pace.
Mm,
And then to get that pace to move in harmony with the Hunyuan chi.
mhm,
So that when it's spring, it's spring. When it's winter. When it's right, and you're just riding that naturally. And that's one of the things about a hermit too. When he's out there, that's always that's what it is. And so, of course, he's more linked to the Hunyuan chi than he would be if he's in the marketplace. But yeah, that game investment. I mentioned before the 10 bulls in the Zen tradition, and the first bull is where he sees the footprints. He doesn't see the bull yet, but it's a reference that he's left the whirring of the cicadas behind. And the whirring of the cicadas is the hustle and bustle of the city and human activity. And the fact that once you get in a collection of humans like a city, there's just always a tangled mass of intent running in every direction. And that's not necessarily conducive to the stuff that a hermit is after. So the cold mountain's better, right? But there's definitely a turning away, right? Because the investment in that world, so there's this idea because the 10th bull, for a long time, there were only 9 bulls. And then the 10th bull was added. And the 10th bull is called back in the world.
that's
So
like the
there's this.
bodhisattva.
Exactly.
Mhm,
So it's like now that you have seen the bull, you've captured the bull, you've tamed the bull, you've ridden the bull home. You have transcended the bull, you have transcended self, and now there's just an empty hollow circle. And then there's 10 back in the world. And which is I guess that would be a very Mahayanist approach. Uh, but there is that. Now, within the Zen tradition, they don't really, at least some very famous masters have said, don't think about merit. There's really is no such thing as merit.
hmm.
But you're not back in the world with to be attached, right? You're back in the world to bring that transcension into the world to the capacity that is, appropriate, I guess.
Because, until everybody's ready to level up, no one is ready to level up, or there's no value in everyone leveling up.
That's the bodhisattvic idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the point about merit. I guess I'm ascribing some meaning to merit because of the current, equity push, and equity being an adversary to meritocracy. So,
Uh,
say the part about merit
well,
again, maybe.
there's this reference to Zen bones. And the reason they talk about Zen bones is because when the birds of prey show up, there's nothing in Zen for the bird of prey. Well, what's the bird of prey? The bird of prey is that enculturated mind that wants security, that wants possession, that wants attainment, that wants enlightenment,
Mhm.
that wants to be the Buddha, that wants, right? But Zen doesn't have any of that. Zen is just like, when an emperor made a bunch of Zen monasteries and Buddhist monasteries, and he asked the famous master, I'm not going to claim, I know it wasn't Marcus Aurelius, uh, but he asked this famous Zen master, he said, "What merit will I accumulate by building all these temples?" And he said to him, "None whatsoever." And then to rub it in, he said, "The giver should be thankful. The giver should be thankful." You gotta love this guy. How do you walk with balls that big? I don't know. To say that to the emperor, right? Uh, but he was a great Zen master. He had no attachment. You can't cancel him, even if you're the emperor. What does he care? Cut his head off. He won't bat an eyelash, right? Now that was Lin Shi Yichuan, who was known as Rinzai, the founder of the Rinzai sect, the Chan master. That I know wasn't Marcus Aurelius. So, uh, but yeah, so there is this, there is the master, right, who has no game investment, but he's still in the world messing around with the emperor, encouraging him to make Buddhist temples to help the process, but he's not going to bullshit the emperor either. You know, he's not going to do. That's why I know full well, at least my picture of reality. I don't think I'm going to get a better place in heaven because I help the kids in Africa. I just purely don't want their lives to suck. That's it, and that's enough, right? So, but this idea of merit, that's a bird of prey,
Mm,
right? It says, "Oh, I can take this merit, I can hang it on
got
me
it.
now."
Yeah.
Right? But there's no merit because you're going past that, right? All that's behind, all that's back in the semantic world, and you're going to strut around with your merit. This is all. That's why one of the things we say in Buddhism is that whatever merit I might have accumulated goes away to the Buddhas, goes away to my teachers, goes away to all the positive things that made everything possible. No merit here, right? Super important, right? And when we watch these people like some curanderos that we know, we say the higher up the mountain you go, the higher the wind blows, right? Or the harder the wind blows. And we've seen people that got to be in prestigious positions and they didn't they started to think that they had merit.
Mhm.
And it was the seed to their downfall. And the more merit they thought, the more they watered that seed,
Mm.
right? Until finally it came in around them. So,
I mean, that's a perfect example, back to the original question of seems like they spent a lot of energy, waking up, but the fact that they missed out on some cleaning up dragged them back into, a world of attachment and suffering ultimately.
sure, sure. Well, that's why I think that we don't make it to Neem Karoli's level just all at once. I think that we take it in baby steps, and there are people that, and this is a hard lesson, that I used to do this thing that it was okay for me to do because I was immunized, but I didn't realize that always that other people weren't automatically immunized like I was. And that is, I was always fascinated by different teachers and masters, and so I would bring them to town, and I would, we'd pay them to teach stuff, and we try to get a taste of what they had. And I did this with a lot of different teachers. We jokingly would call it the Master of the Month Club, right? Well, every one of these pretty much that came through wants to capture you. And
As a meal ticket kinda thing.
as in a meal ticket, as in a you know, they're empire builders, and they want you they're looking for sergeants and lieutenants that they can use to build their empire with. And there's usually a very heavy financial element to it. And if not right away, it will be eventually.
Mm,
And that's why the one old Tibetan man told me, said, "You the way you'll know a true teacher from a false teacher is their attitude about money."
mhm, yep.
Never has that been wrong. Never has that been wrong, right? So, uh,
Which is another way of saying their attitude about security.
absolutely, absolutely, and but doesn't mean that they don't have things to teach you,
Mhm.
but it also means, as the Grateful Dead says, "Steal your face right off of your head," right? So so there's a certain caution. And what would happen is almost almost regularly, a teacher would come, and then when it was time for the teacher to go, a few students went with them. I was like, "Well, it's okay. You go where you," because 'cause I'm not an empire builder, right? You go to the next chapter, go to the next chapter, and then you compare, and then you learn, and because followers are baggage in my worldview, but in other people, it's money in the bank, and they know how to do that, and I gotta admit, they definitely are better at that part, you know?
That's part of why we're still here having these conversations. Um,
I think so.
yeah, good.
Yep.
Well, maybe let's leave it there and pick up some of these threads next time.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even notice we were already past an hour. Sounds good. And we should mention, which I wanted to mention at the beginning also, and that is that I make a lot of these references. And on the website for the podcast, we have for every episode a list of references. So if I made reference to something, you can go and look there. There's a good chance it's there, and maybe if it's in a book, what the book is and when it was published, or once in a while there's a little comment about what it is, and also when I make a big mistake like confusing Alexander the Great with Marcus Aurelius, what a rube, that'll be in there too. Okay, so any of those things that keep me up at night that I want to pass on, they'll be in there too.
Yeah, it's on the Sages tab on the website, at least in its current incarnation. So you can find all the show notes at foolsandsagespodcast.com and then at the Sages page in that site.
Right, and under fools you can get our bios.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, because there has been some ambiguity. People have asked me somewhat suspiciously, "Well, just who are the fools here?" And honestly, we're all the fools. So, but as I mentioned in the beginning, the fool who persists in his folly shall become wise.
Yeah.
So,
And as Aerosmith pointed out, we can learn from fools and sages alike.
absolutely, it's true. Great. Till next time, folks.